I thought I knew who I was, till Facebook suggested I friend my real father. The man who raised me for 28 years wasn't my biological dad. And the strangest part, my real father had been living 3 towns over, posting pictures of his morning coffee and weekend fishing trips, completely unaware that his daughter was scrolling through his timeline. Growing up, I was daddy's little girl, and my name is Sarah, and at 28, I thought I had life figured out. My dad, Robert, was this larger-than-life guy who worked construction during the day and coached Little League on weekends. He had these massive hands that could fix anything: broken bikes, scraped knees, teenage heartbreaks. Mom used to joke that I was his shadow, following him around the house with my toy toolbox, pretending to help with projects. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Dad had this way of making me feel like the most important person in the world. Every school play, every soccer game, every science fair. He was there in the front row, sometimes still covered in sawdust from the job site, cheering louder than any other parent. Mom would elbow him to quiet down, but she'd be smiling. We were the Andersons, and that meant something. I inherited what I thought were his eyes, this unusual shade of green that people always commented on. "You definitely got those from your dad," strangers would say, and I'd beam with pride. Dad would ruffle my hair and say, "She's got the Anderson stubborn streak too," whenever I'd dig my heels in about something. It was our little joke. The Anderson genes were strong, apparently. When I was 16, Dad taught me how to drive in his beat-up pickup truck in the parking lot behind Walmart. I'll never forget how patient he was, never once raising his voice, even when I accidentally backed into a shopping cart return. "That's okay, kiddo," he said, laughing as he got out to assess the minimal damage. "The truck's got character marks now." That was Dad. Everything was fixable. Everything had a silver lining. College was hard because it meant leaving him. Dad cried at drop-off, which mortified me at 18, but now makes my heart ache in the best way, always wanting without fail, always wanting to know about my classes, my friends, whether I was eating enough vegetables. Mom would grab the phone halfway through to remind me about laundry and to ask if I needed money, but those conversations with Dad were sacred time. After graduation, I moved back home for a few months while job hunting. It was during this time that I really got to know my father as an adult. We'd sit on the back porch in the evenings, sharing beers and talking about everything. His dreams when he was young, my hopes for the future, the way the world was changing. He told me stories about his childhood that I'd never heard. About growing up poor but proud, about meeting Mom at a church dance and knowing immediately she was the one. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked me one night. "Fireflies blinking around us like tiny lanterns. Raising a daughter who's kind and strong and knows her worth. That's not genetics, Sarah. That's choice." I moved to Denver for my marketing job, but we stayed close. Dad wasn't much for technology, but he learned to text just to send me photos of his latest woodworking projects and random dad jokes. His texts were always slightly off. Predictive text would turn "how are you" into "how ate you," but they were perfectly him. When I started dating Marcus, Dad was protective but fair. He grilled him good-naturedly about his intentions, his job, whether he knew how to change a tire. Marcus passed the test, mostly because he laughed at Dad's terrible puns and complimented Mom's cooking. The 3 of them got along so well that sometimes I felt like the outsider at family dinners. Dad walked me down the aisle 2 years ago, and I swear he cried harder than I did. During our father-daughter dance to my girl, he whispered, "I'm so proud of who you've become. Your kids are going to be so lucky to have you as their mom." Marcus and I had been trying to get pregnant, and Dad was already planning the nursery he wanted to build. Everything felt right. I had this incredible foundation of love and support, this man who'd shown me what it meant to be cherished unconditionally. Dad had given me confidence, humor, and a deep sense of security in who I was. I was Sarah Anderson, daughter of Robert and Linda, carrier of those distinctive green eyes and that notorious stubborn streak. The funny thing about identity is how solid it feels until something cracks the foundation. You don't realize how much of yourself is built on assumptions until those assumptions start crumbling. I thought I knew exactly where I came from, what made me who I was, why I loved the smell of sawdust, and why I could never back down from an argument. I was about to learn that everything I thought I knew about myself was built on a 30-year-old secret that would change not just my understanding of my genetics, but my entire sense of self. And the weirdest part, the truth was hiding in plain sight on social media, just waiting for an algorithm to connect the dots I never even knew existed. It started with a random comment from my cousin Emma at Christmas dinner. We were looking through old photo albums, the way families do when they're avoiding political conversations. She picked up a picture of me from when I was about 5. Pigtails, gap-toothed grin, sitting on Dad's shoulders at some county fair. "You know, Sarah," Emma said, squinting at the photo, "I always thought it was weird that you do and really look like Uncle Robert or Aunt Linda. Like at all." I laughed it off. Em, really feeling the family love here? But she kept going, in that way cousins do when they've had too much wine. "No, seriously, look at this picture, then look at you now. The bone structure is totally different. And those eyes, where did those come from? Nobody in our family has eyes like that." What? Mom quickly changed the subject, but I caught her and Dad exchanging a look. What? It was brief, barely a second, but there was something there, something that made my stomach flutter with unease. Later that night, Marcus and I were driving home, and I couldn't shake what Emma had said. "Do you think I look like my parents?" I asked him. He glanced over at me, clearly not wanting to wade into family drama. "You look like you, babe. That's all that matters." "That's not an answer." "Okay, fine. You don't really look like either of them. But lots of kids don't. Genetics are weird." But it wasn't just Emma's comment. So once the seed was planted, I started noticing things I'd somehow overlooked my entire life. Dad was 5 feet 6 inches with brown eyes and dark hair that had gone gray early. Mom was 5 feet 4 inches with hazel eyes and auburn hair. I was 5 feet 8 with those distinctive green eyes and naturally blonde. Hair ID always attributed to some recessive gene. More than that, we were just ... different. Dad was this gentle, methodical guy who approached everything with patience and careful planning. I was impulsive, quick-tempered, prone to making decisions with my gut rather than my head. Mom always said I got my fire from her side of the family. But when I really looked at her relatives, they were all pretty mellow too. The differences I'd always celebrated as making me unique started feeling like evidence of something else entirely. My love of music. Neither of my parents could carry a tune. My weird ability to pick up languages easily. Dad barely spoke English without a heavy accent from his childhood in rural Montana. Mom had taken Spanish in high school, but could barely order at a Mexican restaurant. My hands, long fingers, completely different from Dad's thick, squared-off ones. It was like someone had adjusted the focus on a picture I'd been looking at my whole life. And suddenly details I'd never noticed were sharp and obvious. The breaking point came 3 months later. Marcus and I were at this new restaurant downtown, and our server was this guy probably in his 50s with the most striking green eyes I'd ever seen. Not just green, the exact same unusual shade as mine, with these little golden flecks around the iris that I'd only ever seen in my own reflection. "Oh my God," the server said when he took our order, staring at me with this stunned expression. "This is going to sound crazy, but you have the exact same eyes as me." "Like, exactly? Are we related?" I laughed nervously. "I don't think so. People say I have unusual eyes, but ... "No, this is different," he insisted. "I've never seen eyes like this except in the mirror. What's your last name?" "Anderson." He looked disappointed but not surprised. "Mine's Mitchell. Probably just a coincidence, but wow, it's like looking at a family member I've never met." Marcus made small talk to fill the awkward silence, but I was spiraling. This complete stranger had eyes identical to mine, and he'd recognized the similarity immediately. How was that possible if they were some rare genetic trait from the Anderson line? That night, I called Mom. "Mom, can you tell me about when I was born? Like the hospital, the delivery, everything?" There was a pause. "Why are you asking about that, honey? Just curious. I might want kids soon, and I want to know what to expect." She told me the story I'd heard before. Long labor, Dad pacing in the waiting room, how I came out screaming and didn't stop for 3 hours. But something in her voice sounded rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a play she'd performed too many times. "Mom, was there ever? I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but was there any chance I could have been switched at birth or something?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Sarah Elizabeth Anderson, what on earth would make you ask something like that?" The use of my full name told me I'd hit a nerve. "I don't know. People keep saying I don't look like you and Dad, And today this stranger said I had the same eyes as him, and it just got me thinking. People say stupid things. You're our daughter, and that's the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it. Not even close. The questions I'd started asking had awakened something I couldn't put back to sleep. Every time I looked in the mirror, instead of seeing Sarah Anderson, I was seeing a stranger with someone else's eyes, someone else's height, someone else's quick temper and musical ear. The foundation of who I thought I was had developed a crack, and I could feel it spreading. The DNA kit sat in my Amazon cart for 3 weeks before I finally ordered it. Every time I went to check out, I'd imagine Dad's face if he found out, and I'd close the browser. This felt like the ultimate betrayal, questioning the man who'd loved me unconditionally, who'd earned the right to be called my father through 28 years of showing up. But the questions wouldn't leave me alone. They'd wake me up at 3 a.m. and follow me through my workday. Every time someone mentioned a family resemblance or asked where I got my eyes, my height, my stubborn streak, I felt like a fraud. What if everything I thought I knew about myself was wrong? Marcus was supportive but cautious. "You sure you want to open this can of worms?" he asked one evening as we were making dinner. "What if the answer isn't what you want to hear? What if it is what I need to hear?" He stopped chopping onions and looked at me. "Okay, but let's think about this logically. Best case scenario. The test confirms Robert is your biological dad, and you can put all these doubts to rest. Worst case scenario. What? You find out he's not, and then what? Are you prepared for that conversation with your parents?" I hadn't thought that far ahead, honestly. I was still stuck on just needing to know. "I can't keep living with these questions, Mark. It's driving me crazy. Have you considered just asking your mom directly?" Actually, multiple times I'd started to dial her number, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd shut down the conversation about hospital mix-ups, or the look she and Dad had exchanged at Christmas. There was a secret there. I was sure of it, but I wasn't sure a direct confrontation would get me the truth. The night I finally ordered the kit, I had this vivid dream about the server from the restaurant. In the dream, we were standing in front of a mirror, and our reflections were identical, except he was holding this old photograph of a little girl who looked exactly like me at that age. When I tried to ask him about the photo, he just pointed to my eyes and said, "You already know." I woke up with my heart pounding and my phone in my hand. The Ancestry kit was ordered before I was fully conscious, expedited shipping and everything. When it arrived 3 days later in that innocuous white envelope, it felt heavier than it should have. Marcus found me staring at it on the kitchen counter like it might explode. "Second thoughts?" he asked. Terrified thoughts, I corrected. "What if I'm about to blow up my entire family? What if you're about to find your real one?" That possibility hadn't really occurred to me. I'd been so focused on potentially losing the dad I knew and loved that I had unconsidered I might gain something in the process. What if there was a biological father out there who'd always wondered about me? What if I had half-siblings? What if there was a whole other family tree I belonged to? The instructions were simple enough. Spit in a tube, mail it back, wait for results. But standing in the bathroom that morning, trying to work up enough saliva, felt like crossing a point of no return. Once I sealed that tube and dropped it in the mailbox, there would be no taking it back. I thought about Dad teaching me to drive, walking me down the aisle, all those Sunday phone calls during college. Would those memories feel different if the test proved he wasn't my biological father? Would his love feel less real somehow? Then I thought about my cousin Emma's words, the server's identical eyes, the way Mom had gotten defensive about the hospital story. The questions were already changing how I saw everything. At least this way, I'd know the truth instead of slowly driving myself insane with speculation. The spit tube felt clinical and cold as I sealed it. I'd watched enough true crime shows to know that DNA doesn't lie, that it reveals secrets families have kept buried for decades. But I'd never imagined I'd be the one digging up those secrets. Marcus drove me to the post office because I was too nervous to go alone. We stood at the mailbox for a full minute before I finally dropped the package in. The sound it made hitting the bottom felt final, like a door slamming shut on the life I'd always known. "No matter what happens," Marcus said, taking my hand as we walked back to the car, "Robert is still the man who raised you. That doesn't change." He was right, of course, but it didn't make the wait any easier. The email said results would be available in 6 to 8 weeks. I marked the date on my calendar and tried to go about my normal life, but every day felt like I was holding my breath. I started paying closer attention to Dad during our weekly phone calls, memorizing the sound of his laugh, the way he always asked about Marcus and whether I was saving enough money. If these conversations were about to change forever, I wanted to remember them exactly as they'd always been. Meanwhile, I found myself staring at strangers on the street, wondering if any of them had my eyes, my height, my quick temper. What if my biological father was out there somewhere, completely unaware that his daughter was about to discover him through the magic of modern science? The waiting was the hardest part. Every day that passed brought me closer to answers I wasn't sure I was ready for, but couldn't live without. The email came on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in a marketing meeting, pretending to pay attention to quarterly projections. My phone buzzed with a notification from Aunt Stridna. "Your results are ready?" I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the toilet lid with my phone in shaking hands. This was it. After 7 weeks of obsessing, imagining every possible scenario, and nearly calling customer service twice to cancel the whole thing, I was about to find out who I really was. The login page seemed to load slower than usual, like the internet knew I needed a few more seconds to prepare. When it finally opened, there was my genetic breakdown to 42% Irish, 23% German, 18% Scandinavian, and a bunch of smaller percentages that meant I was basically a European mutt. Nothing surprising there. But it was the close family section that made my heart stop. No matches for father. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over. There should have been a match showing Robert Anderson as my father with 50% shared DNA. Instead, there was nothing. It's not even a close paternal relative. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing all the air out of my lungs. I'd prepared myself for this possibility, but seeing it in black and white was completely different from imagining it. The man who'd raised me, who I'd called Dad for 28 years, who taught me to ride a bike and walked me down the aisle, wasn't my biological father. But there was more. Under DNA matches, there was a list of potential relatives ranked by shared genetic material. And right at the top, showing 25% shared DNA, the amount you D-share with a half-sibling, was someone named David Mitchell. David Mitchell, the same last name as the server from the restaurant, the one with my eyes. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely tap on his profile. When it loaded, there wasn't much information. Just a generic silhouette profile picture and a brief bio that said father of 3, grandfather of 7, living in Colorado Springs. Interested in family history and genealogy. Colorado Springs. 3 towns over from where I grew up. There was a message feature, but what do you even say to someone who might be your half-brother? "Hey, I think we share a dad, and also I think your father might be my father too. By the way, I served you dinner a few months ago." I sat in that bathroom stall for 20 minutes, staring at his profile and trying to process what I was seeing. If David Mitchell was my half-sibling, then presumably his father was my biological father. A man I'd never met, who lived an hour away from where I'd grown up, who had no idea I existed. When I finally made it back to the meeting, my boss asked if I was feeling okay. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost, which wasn't far from the truth. I mumbled something about a stomach bug and tried to focus on conversion rates and demographic targeting. But my brain was stuck on that number. 25% shared DNA. The rest of the workday was a blur. I kept refreshing the DNA results page, hoping something would change, that maybe there was an error in the system. But every time I logged in, David Mitchell was still there at the top of my match list. Representing a family I'd never known existed, I couldn't bring myself to call Marcus from the office, so I suffered through the remaining meetings and the drive home in a state of shocked numbness. It felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Like I'd somehow gotten access to a stranger's DNA results by mistake. Marcus took one look at my face when I walked through the door and knew immediately. "The results came back," he said. It wasn't a question. I just nodded and handed him my phone with the Ancestradana page still open. He scrolled through the results in silence, his expression getting more serious as he read. "Sarah, honey, I'm so sorry."
Ow.
That's when I finally broke down. All the emotions I'd been holding back during those sterile work meetings came pouring out at once. 28 years of believing I knew who I was, where I came from, what family meant. All of it had been built on a lie. "I don't understand," I sobbed into his shoulder. "How could they not tell me? How could Mom and Dad let me go my whole life not knowing?" Marcus held me while I cried, not trying to offer solutions or explanations, just letting me feel everything. When I finally calmed down enough to speak coherently, we sat on the couch and went through the results together. "Look," he said, pointing to David Mitchell's profile. "He's interested in genealogy. Maybe he's been looking for family too. Maybe this is good news for both of you." Hadn't thought about it from that perspective. What if David's father, my biological father, had always wondered about me? What if he'd been hoping to find me someday, but didn't know how? Or what if he had no idea I existed at all? The questions were multiplying faster than I could process them. Did my biological father know my mother? Was I the result of an affair, a one-night stand, or something else entirely? Did David know about me? Did he have other siblings I'd match with once their tests processed? Most importantly, did I want to open this door, or was some knowledge too dangerous to pursue? I looked at my phone again, at David Mitchell's profile with its generic silhouette picture, and realized I was standing at the edge of a cliff. I could step back, pretend I'd never taken the test, and continue living the life I'd always known. Or I could jump into the unknown and see where it led me. The choice was mine, but there was no going back to not knowing. I messaged David Mitchell that night, after 3 drafts and 2 glasses of wine for courage. I kept it simple. "Hi, David. I recently got my DNA results back, and it looks like we might be half-siblings. I'd love to chat if you're open to it. My name is Sarah." He responded within an hour, which somehow made everything feel more real. "Sarah, I've been doing genealogy research for years and never found any half-siblings. This is incredible. Would you like to talk on the phone?" We arranged a call the next evening. In the meantime, I had a much harder conversation to navigate. Confronting my parents about nearly 3 decades of lies, I drove to their house on Thursday night without calling first, which was unlike me. Mom was watching her evening news show, and Dad was in his workshop tinkering with some project. For a moment, seeing them in their normal routine, I almost lost my nerve. They looked so innocent, so unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to implode. "Sarah, what a nice surprise," Mom said, muting the TV. "Is everything okay? You look upset? We need to talk." All 3 of us. Something in my tone must have warned her because her face went pale. "Let me get your father." Dad came in from the garage with sawdust in his hair and a smile that faltered when he saw my expression. "What's wrong, kiddo?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the DNA results page. I took a DNA test. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Dad sank into his chair like someone had cut his strings, while Mom just stared at the screen. "Sarah," she finally whispered, "I can explain." 28 years, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 28 years you let me believe Robert was my biological father? Do you have any idea what this has done to me? Dad looked up with tears in his eyes. "I am your father, Sarah. Biology doesn't change that. But you should have told me. Both of you should have told me." Mom was crying now, too. "We wanted to. God, we wanted to tell you so many times. But you were so happy, and Robert loved you so much, and we thought it would be easier this way." "Easier for who?" I was angrier than I'd expected to be. "You think it was easier for me to find out from a computer that everything I believed about myself was a lie?" Dad stood up and tried to approach me, but I stepped back. "Tell me everything right now. I want the whole truth." So they did. Through tears and long pauses and moments where they looked at each other like they were still deciding how much to reveal, they told me the story I should have known my entire life. Mom had been dating Dad for about a year when she went to her high school reunion. She ran into her old boyfriend, Tom Mitchell, David's father, and they ended up having a one-night stand. She came home feeling guilty and terrible, but didn't tell Dad what had happened. A few weeks later, she realized she was pregnant. "I knew the timing was close," Mom said, not looking at me. "But I convinced myself it had to be Robert's baby. We were talking about getting married anyway, and I thought, I hoped. They got married quickly before I was born." Dad knew there was a chance I wasn't his biologically, but he chose not to pursue testing. "I didn't want to know," Dad said quietly. "I was already in love with the idea of you, and I was in love with your mother. It didn't matter to me whose DNA you had. But when I was born," Mom continued, "you looked just like Tom. Same eyes, same hair color. Robert never said anything, but I knew he knew." I stared at them both, processing this information. "So you've both known my entire life that Robert might not be my biological father, and you never thought I deserved to know?" "We were protecting you," Mom said defensively. "Protecting our family." What good would it have done? What good? How about letting me know my medical history, my biological family, letting me make my own choices about who I wanted to know? Dad finally spoke up. Sarah, I was terrified that if you found out, you'd want to find him. Maybe you'd love him more than me. That broke something in my chest. This man who had been such a pillar of strength my entire life was scared of losing me to someone who'd never even known I existed. Dad, I said, and his face crumpled with relief at the word. You raised me. You taught me everything I know about love and loyalty and showing up for people. Some stranger's DNA doesn't change that. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true. Everything felt different now. When I looked at Dad, I saw all the same love and devotion I'd always seen, but also this shadow of deception that had colored every interaction we'd ever had. I need space to process this, I told them. I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I need time. I left them both crying in their living room and drove home in a daze. Marcus was waiting with takeout and a bottle of wine. Bless him. How did it go? He asked gently. About as well as you'd expect when you find out your entire family has been lying to you for 3 decades. That night, I called David Mitchell. He was warm and funny and had the same laugh I recognized from looking in the mirror. We talked for 2 hours about everything. His kids, my job, our shared love of terrible reality TV shows, eventually his father. Dad's going to be shocked, David said. But he'll want to meet you, I'm sure of it. He's a good man, Sarah. I think you'll like him. 24 hours after learning that my dad wasn't my dad, I was about to meet the man who actually was. Tom Mitchell, my biological father, and I met at a coffee shop in Colorado Springs 2 weeks later. I'd spent those 14 days stalking his Facebook profile like a detective, studying his face for similarities to mine, reading through years of posts about fishing trips and grandkids, baseball games, and political opinions that sometimes made me cringe. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee and the most nervous expression I'd ever seen on a human face. When our eyes met, those identical green eyes that had started this whole journey, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Sarah. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Here was this man who was genetically my father, but felt like a complete stranger. He was taller than I'd expected, with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He looked like what I might look like in 25 years if I were a man. The conversation was awkward at first. What do you say to someone who contributed half your DNA but missed your entire childhood? He covered the basics. My job, his retirement from teaching high school history, the weather. But gradually we found our rhythm. I need you to know, he said about an hour in, I had no idea about you. If I had known Linda was pregnant, if I had any clue that you existed, I would have been there. I would have tried to be part of your life. I believed him. There was something genuine in his voice, a sadness that felt real. Tell me about your mom, he said. Is she? How is she? I told him about growing up with Linda and Robert, about how loved and supported I'd always felt, about the family I'd known. He listened without jealousy or bitterness, just genuine interest in the life his daughter had lived without him. Robert sounds like a good man, he said finally. I'm glad you had him. That's when it really hit me. I hadn't lost a father. I'd gained one. Robert Anderson was still the man who'd shaped who I was, who'd taught me how to be strong and kind and resilient. Tom Mitchell was the man who'd given me half my genetic makeup and apparently my love of terrible puns and my inability to fold fitted sheets properly. Meeting Tom opened a door to a whole other family I'd never known existed. Through David, I met 2 other half-siblings. Jennifer, a nurse in Denver, and Michael, who lived in California but visited Colorado every summer. I had nieces and nephews who looked like me, who shared my weird sense of humor and my tendency to talk too fast when I'm excited. The hardest part was navigating the relationship with Robert and Linda. Dad was hurt, understandably, that I was building relationships with my biological family. Mom was defensive about the choices they'd made. It took months of family therapy and lots of difficult conversations before we found our new normal. I need you to understand something, I told Dad during one particularly hard session. You will always be my father. Tom is my biological dad, but you're the one who earned that title every single day for 28 years. How? Meeting him doesn't change that. Dad cried, which made me cry, which made the therapist reach for more tissues. The most unexpected part of this whole journey was how it changed my relationship with myself. Those questions about where my stubborn streak came from, why I was so much taller than my parents, why I had such a strong reaction to injustice. They all made sense now. I'd inherited Tom's height, his quick temper, his passion for learning new things. But I'd learned how to channel those traits from Robert, who'd modeled patience and steady love and showing up even when things got hard. I was a combination of nature and nurture in the most literal sense. And understanding that felt like finding a missing piece of a puzzle I didn't know was incomplete. Marcus and I got pregnant 6 months after the DNA revelation, when our son was born. He had Robert's patient temperament and Tom's green eyes, and this perfect little scowl that was pure me. All 3 of his grandfathers were in the waiting room. Robert, who'd been my dad from day one. Tom, who was learning how to be a grandfather late in life. Marcus's father, who brought donuts and terrible jokes to lighten the mood. "Look at that," Robert said, holding his grandson for the first time. "He's got the Anderson stubborn streak." Tom laughed. "It's definitely the Mitchell stubborn streak. Trust me, I know it well." "Poor kid," Marcus said. "Double the stubbornness." But watching these 2 men, the one who'd raised me and the one who'd created me, cooing over my baby together, I realized this was what family actually looked like. Not the neat nuclear unit I'd always imagined, but this messy, complicated, beautiful web of people who choose to love each other despite everything. Taking that DNA test had blown up my understanding of who I was. But it had also given me something precious. The knowledge that love isn't limited by biology. That families can expand to include people you never knew you were missing. And that sometimes the most important truths are the ones that challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. Now, when people comment on my son's unusual eyes or ask where he gets his personality, I smile and think about genetics and choice, about nature and nurture, about the 2 men who shaped who I am in completely different but equally important ways.